This is Proxy Countdown. Welcome to the big show for the week of January 29th, 2024. Alongside my tag team partner, Matt Moscardi, I'm Damian Rollis. On today's countdown, a strange game of musical board chairs at Superior Energy Service, a climate denier activist at BP, vote results at Becton Dickinson and Walgreens, and our first foray into a non-U.S. annual shareholder meeting at German technology conglomerate Siemens, where we test Matt's analytical patience and prowess.
I have none.
Let's begin on our trade wire, where it's been a quiet week in player moves, as it seems that most large cap companies have an idea of their early 2024 rosters already. Cintas Corporation added Beverly Carmichael. Beverly is a director at VIAD and brings decades of human resources expertise to Cintas, including she was formerly Chief People Officer at Red Robin, Cracker Barrel, and Ticketmaster. Trimble added two new directors, Kara Sprague and Ron Narishian. Kara is Chief Product Officer at F5. This is her first directorship, while Ron is the former CEO and current chair at Keysight Technologies, where he controls a board leading 19% of influence. At S&T Bank Corp, say goodbye to Stephen Weingarten, who is stepping down at the company's 2024 annual meeting. And lastly, at Superior Energy Services, we have an unusual director dance that I haven't seen before. Bear with me here. First,
Okay.
Julie Robertson resigned, and then shareholders elected Ian Foster 3 days later to fill the vacancy created by the resignation of Julie Robertson. Then Timothy Winfrey also resigned, and shareholders elected Julie Robertson 3 days later to fill the vacancy created by the resignation of Timothy Winfrey. Matt, the same Julie Robertson whose resignation created a vacancy that was filled by Ian Foster. So the real question is, why couldn't Julie Robertson replace Julie Robertson?
This is weird. It's the same Julie Robertson?
This is the exact language from the filing. This is exactly how they filled the vacancies in that order.
So here's tea leaf reading, and this is what you sometimes have to do in these people situations. Julie Robertson and Timothy Winfrey hated each other.
Ooh.
Timothy Winfrey refused to leave despite being asked. So Julie Robertson made a threat and then walked out. Investors brought him back, and then the rest of the board said, Tim, you get out. Get out. Mm-hmm. We want Julie back. And it allowed getting Tim out allowed Julie to come back.
That's Matt's
that
conjecture.
Is my pure conspiracy theory.
For all listeners at Superior Energy Services, reach out to the Proxy Countdown. Let us know what happened. Moving over to our proxy cage matches. Nothing new at Disney to report. So let's move over to a strange case at BP, where activist investor Blue Bell Capital Partners has called on BP to ditch its commitment to cut oil and gas output, as well as other key parts of its strategy to transform the company into a clean energy provider. In a letter seen by the Financial Times, Blue Bell said BP's pledge to reduce oil and gas production by 25% by 2030 compared with 2019 levels meant it was destroying shareholder value by moving away from hydrocarbons faster than society. The hedge fund also challenged the pace and extent of investment in BP's transition businesses, biofuels, convenience, charging, renewables, and hydrogen, by stating that BP should reduce investments in bioenergy, hydrogen, and renewables by 2030 by $28 billion or 60%, Most of the reduction, according to Bluebell, could be achieved by stopping all investment in renewables, a sector where BP has no right to win, it said, against specialist incumbents. How about that from Bluebell?
Well, let's remind everybody who Bluebell is. They are effectively the Strive Asset Management of Europe. And for memory's sake, they, just a few years ago, were writing letters to axe Larry Fink from BlackRock because of his focus on ESG. So they were an early anti-woke player, but they are about as successful as Strive has been in having any action behind their letter writing. They have $250 million in assets under management, which is even less than Strive has. They have asked Glencore to do more coal stuff, and now they're after BP to stop doing all that pesky renewable. File this firmly in idiot with the megaphone category. This is not something that is actually a serious proxy match, and I don't think anyone will take it seriously.
Moving over to our vote results table. Let's start with one notable vote at a smaller cap company. At Enerpac Tool Group, there are over 14 million votes against SeonPay, representing 29% of the vote, but only an average of about 1.5 million votes against the Compensation Committee board members who crafted the pay policies. Big disconnect there. I mean,
well, it brings up the Elon Musk question, right? We've just seen Elon Musk see his pay get revoked by the Delaware courts. It was one, minority shareholder who sued, saying this is bad for investors. And frankly, the Compensation Committee has never seen less than 90% support at Tesla. So people don't seem to be the problem in the equation of people coming up with compensation.
At large cap companies, the votes are in at two companies previewed here at the Proxy Countdown: Becton, Dickinson and Company and Walgreens Boots Alliance. At Becton, shareholders are more than happy as no single proposal received more than 10% votes against. On the big vote, Matt recommended a vote against Chair and CEO Thomas Pollan based on a network power analysis. 8% of shareholders agreed with Matt's analysis, while the other 92% voted for the CEO's reelection. Matt also said no on SeonPay, but again, 92% of voters disagreed with that assessment.
You could see the real power of Proxy Countdown there.
At Walgreens, Matt passionately advocated against Executive Chair Stefano Pessina, Compensation Committee Chair Nancy Schlichting, and Lead Independent Director Ginger Graham. All three directors, Matt, unfortunately, were reelected with ease, but it's worth pointing out that their votes against represented the three highest values on the board. So some influence there, Matt.
That's something. That's a start.
Matt said no on pay. 14% of shareholders actually agreed with that. Matt said no on a cigarette waste report proposed by the Sisters of St. Francis of Philadelphia. Unfortunately for the nuns, 94% of voters agreed with Matt and rejected this proposal. Matt said yes on Kenneth Steiner's proposal for an independent board chair. 31% of voters agreed, but the proposal still falls short of a majority. This is down from 34% support in 2023.
That part makes me sad that I actually might have removed support for this.
A living wage proposal brought by John Chevedden was rejected by just over 90% of the vote. An anti-woke, anti-ESG proposal from the troll group known as the National Center for Public Policy Research received a very sad support of just 1% of the voters. And finally, a pro-choice church requesting a report on risks of reproductive health care legislation received the support of only 8% of share voters. Before we move on to our big vote at Siemens, two other notable votes at large cap companies include 27% against SeonPay at Air Products and Chemicals and 22% of votes against Compensation Committee Chair Nancy McKinstry at Accenture despite the fact that Say on Pay was approved by 91% of shareholders. I'm not sure about the disconnect there as well. That's it. That's from our vote results table, Matt. Let's move on to the big vote. Where we're covering our first non-American company, Siemens. Siemens, based in Germany, their annual vote is next week, February 8th. Before I hand this behemoth off to Matt, I want a few observations at the top. This is Germany has a dual board structure. There is a supervisory board that is akin to an American board, right? Those are the directors that are actually voted in by shareholders, and there is a management board, which is akin to our named executive officers. These are appointed and nominated by the supervisory board, but shareholders cannot vote in these members. This is where you usually find the CEO. You will not find the CEO of German companies on the supervisory board. Of that board, Matt, there are 20 members, the supervisory board, 20 members that shareholders can elect. 10 of these at Siemens are employee representatives. All German boards are half employees and half just sort of regular independent directors. And finally, I wanted to point out that there seems to be a real power structure on this board represented by the chairman's committee. This includes 4 members: Jim Snabe, who's the chair of the board, Werner Brandt, who's second deputy chair of the board, and then 2 employee representatives, Jürgen Kerner and Birgit Steinborn. But I wanted to point that out, that the power on this board seems to reside with the chairman's committee. I hope I set this up adequately for you, Matt, because there's a lot to talk about here. This is a very unusual structure compared to American boards.
Yeah, so I have to start off by saying I am not an expert in corporate governance in Germany. This is and Germany is very specific relative to France, relative to Italy, relative to the UK.
Yeah, and and I'll say that this comes from a request from a listener who asked us to cover a non-American board, so we're more than happy to do so.
So there's a lot of nuance here that might get lost in terms of the bureaucracy or the legal structures. For instance, proxy access isn't a thing in Germany the way it can be in the United States. The way the nomination process happens is different. There's a lot of nuance that goes into that's going to be different. But I'll say this.
Before you get to that, let me point out two of the differences here that are important to focus on this year. First of all, shareholders are not actually voting on the re-election of any board members this year.
Right.
Instead,
that's one of the big things.
Instead, what they're asked to do is to ratify the acts of the members of the managing board and to ratify the acts of the members of the supervisory board. So essentially, it's a vote. It's a no confidence vote, right? It's a confidence vote. This is
like moral support.
Moral support.
That's what it is.
And to put this into context, at the 2023 annual meeting, all supervisory board directors were ratified with votes between 99.2% and 99.8% support.
I mean, the question I would have about that is, who got the 99.2 and were they angry that they didn't get 99.8? But the reality here is, I think as you're pointing out, is these are effectively rubber stamp votes, right? Like there is very little disagreement on these votes, even less so than when it comes to U.S. elections of directors.
Well, I will say also that last year there were 7 supervisory board members up for a vote, and there was one board member who did receive over 10% no vote. So it's similar,
but that's when they're up for election.
That's when they're up for election.
The ratification votes are largely
Yes.
rubber stamp votes. These are 99% agreement. So it's incredibly rare to see a no ratification vote.
And one other wrinkle before you get to the directors, I want to talk about pay, is that there are 2 votes on pay this year. There's a traditional, I'll call it a say on pay vote, although this one is binding, where shareholders are asked to resolve on the approval of the compensation report. That is for this fiscal year 2023. And the other one is to resolve on the approval of the compensation system. So this is a vote that comes up every 4 years that analyzes the entire system to which the board pays its members. So there are two separate pay votes this year. And again, different than the U.S. in that the traditional say on pay vote here does seem to be binding. So okay.
Yes, which is a big difference. But I think actually when it comes to the board, the important thing that you point out is there's two boards, but there's really three groups in those two boards. There's the management board, which is the NEOs, effectively, the American equivalent of NEOs. There's a supervisory board, which is the board,
the elected board, the elected board members.
Inside of that, there's employee directors and shareholder directors, right?
Yeah.
And
all
they're 10 and 10 each here.
All German boards of this side must have half the board represented by employee representatives, yes.
So what we're going to talk about is the supervisory board and the influence of power dynamics inside of that using our data. So let's start with the team performance. Overall, Siemens has the third most powerful supervisory board in Germany by network power.
Okay.
And by network power, that is these directors, the amount of market cap they control in themselves and their network of friends on other boards that they've been on, whether it's in Germany or outside of Germany. These are very powerful people inside a German company. The top boards inside Germany are Zalando and Deutsche Bank. So this is a massive organization with powerful people who work there. Make no mistake, even if you think it's, sort of like a smaller German board or parochial board, it's not. 58% of the influence of Siemens is controlled by connected directors. So these are people that know people. And 57% of the influence is actually controlled by PhDs and academics.
Okay.
So these are smart people that know people. This is a impressive board, actually, when you break it down.
And let's not forget that half of the board are employees of Siemens who generally do not sit on any other outside boards.
Right. So, I mean, when I'm talking about these percentages, the interesting part about them is the vast majority of them are actually in the shareholder camp, not the employee camp. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to break those two things down in 1 second, because it's important here to know that I know you mentioned that the chairman's committee is really a center of power. The audit committee is as well. The chairman's committee is largely represented in the audit committee. The audit committee is 8 strong. It is a really big audit committee. Mm-hmm. And unlike in U.S. companies, you can even see this in the compensation. The chair of the audit committee gets an extra 180,000 euros per year compared to just 80,000 euros per year for being the chair of other committees.
Wow.
It is a very big difference, and they value the audit committee very highly. I don't know what that says about the way either Siemens in particular or German companies think about, the audit function, which sort of makes sense that they think this way, but it is a powerful committee. Other than that, the board overall is purely average. 82% of the members are rotation players, meaning they're somewhere between the 15th percentile and 55th percentile of directors everywhere.
But you're also talking about half of that board are employee representatives.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
But there's make no mistake. There's no differentiating when I broke it down individual by individual. They're all average. Like 82% is basically all of them. There are a couple that are a little bit better, but for the most part, they are very average performers overall. And Siemens is not an average company. There are 201 subsidiaries listed in their annual report, their registration statement. It is a large, complex, bureaucratic company with multiple public listings.
It's worth pointing out that there actually is one Siemens family member on this board, Dr. Natalie von Siemens. She is one of 20 members on the supervisory board, but her she's 15th generation Siemens. Am I right about that?
I think.
12th generation Siemens, right? So this is a she
so
only,
we're not
according
talking
to us,
about the Waltons.
No,
right?
exactly.
This is far removed from the Siemens max power, right? So the family actually has diminished power, and our metrics suggest that. In fact, The total influence of the shareholder elected portion of this board is 66%. And the highest of them is Jim Snabe, who is the chair of the board, well outpacing Natalie von Siemens, the family member, which is not something you see in a U.S. structure where you have the family on the board, usually. But this is so far removed that the data suggests that this is really a chair-run company. This is a chair-run board, a chair-run company. Snabe is the highest board, supervisory board member by pay, 602,000 euros. The next up is 460,000 euros for Brandt, and the average was 250,000 euros. So he is almost triple the average board supervisory board member's pay. He's been the highest paid since at least 2019, and he's got the longest tenure on the supervisory board at 10 full years.
Yeah, and remember,
he's a very powerful actor.
And remember, he also chairs the chairman's committee, which is responsible for appointing and dismissing managing board members. So essentially, he not only does he chair the board, he chairs the committee that hires and fires executives at Siemens.
The executives, yes. Some things that stuck out to me is there were a bunch of expertise fails here. There were only 2 supervisory board members who, according to the German Stock Corporation Act, were financial experts, qualified as financial experts. Just 2 on a 20-person board. And those were Brandt and Zachert. Both of them are on the audit committee, but the committee has 8 members. So that means 25%, 1 in 4 of the members are actually financial experts. It seems like a potential oversight when it comes to you've consolidated power in an audit committee, but you don't have any financial experts on the audit committee? Really?
That's Matthias Zachert, who is the chair of the competition committee, and that is Werner Brandt, who is second deputy chair of the board and also on the chairman's committee.
So Brandt really has likely all the power on this audit committee because not
chair
only
of the audit committee as well, right?
He's the only one with the expertise, but he's the chair of that committee and he's on the chairman's committee. That's a trifecta that's actually pretty strong here. Meanwhile, on the other side of that coin, 100% of the board tag themselves in their skills matrix as having sustainability qualifications. 100%. Really? 100% of the board is qualified in sustainability in some way. Okay. At that point, the definition is so vague as to be meaningless. And that part of the skills matrix, financial expert is a mandated requirement of the German Corporate Stock Act. But sustainability expert, there's no regulation on what that means, what that is. In fact, none of the other skills are leadership, all those things. Those are just tagged randomly. The skills matrix here seems random.
We talked about this last week on the Big Vote, talking about Apple and how in the U.S. this we have the same problem where the definitions to which we call people experts in certain skill sets is incredibly vague and in fact even vary from S&P 500 company to S&P 500 company, where a director at Apple might have a certain skill set, but miraculously doesn't have that skill set at another company.
And I think the final thing on the supervisory board that stuck out to me was the network power question. Okay. Now, Regina Dugan is the most powerful by network power, but simply because she has exposure to boards in the U.S. She is on the board of HP, which is a highly interconnected board. So she has a network outside of Europe and Germany. Snabe, though, is a European power broker. He's on the Maersk board, SAP's from Allianz. He's 2 private companies, and he's on actually a U.S. mid-cap AI company, where also on the board with Snabe is Condoleezza Rice, and Bruce Sewell, who is Apple's ex-lawyer, reporting to Tim Cook. So he has connections back to big players in the U.S., but also big players in Europe. This is really a supervisory board, the shareholder component, that we're really talking about 2 to 3 people per your point. It is Snabe, it is Brandt, and it is the chairman's and the third member of the chairman's board, who is
Brigitte Steinborn,
who is the employee rep, and
right.
which gets us into the employee rep piece of this. The employee reps, their total influence for the employee reps is 34%.
Okay.
When we look at them, you can't judge them the same way, and this is part of the nuance. You can't judge them the same way you judge a shareholder rep. First of all, their mandate is different, right? Like, it's not TSR, purely. This is, you're representing employees, so there's a different ask, a different stakeholder involved. The metrics we have, actually, most of them, half of them were unrated because there's not enough history. They sit on just one board, which is this board, with the exception of Jürgen Kerner. Jürgen Kerner is on multiple boards because he's a high-level representative of the trade union IG Metall. And IG Metall actually has 3 of the 10 employee reps on Siemens' board are IG Metall reps. Kerner bats an abysmal 0.033 on earnings, 0.106 on TSR, a 200 overall, and that's because he's on ThyssenKrupp's board and Siemens' board. And he's had exposure to other companies' boards as well. But Kerner is interesting because he's the connective tissue to management. He was on Airbus with IG Metall as a union rep for Airbus in Germany. So he knows the Airbus board members. Airbus board member Amparo Moraleda sat on Marsk's board with both Kasper Rosted and Jim Snabe, who are on the Siemens board. Okay. There is a line you can draw inside 2 degrees to the most influential shareholder rep and the most influential, or among the most influential, employee reps given his position.
Yeah, and remember, of that chairman's committee that I keep referring to, of the 4 board members, one is Jim Snabe, the chair, and another is Jürgen Kerner. So that chairman's committee actually has 2 employee representatives, but they're not rank and file employees. They're 2 people that actually represent, as you pointed out, big trade unions in Europe.
So let's get to the recommendations, because we basically have these there's a lot going on inside this board. I mean, my instincts here are Snabe is a busy man. It's time to move on. He's been there for 10 years, but he's not up for re-election until 2025. Okay. So, like, when it comes to ratifying, there's no sense in not ratifying Jim Snabe. It doesn't do anything. He's not going to move on. There are too many IG Metall reps here. They're consolidated under Jürgen. My instinct would also be, if this was like an election year, you'd cut Jürgen and let the Siemens Works Council, which are reps from inside of Siemens, not the broader trade union, let them rise in power to actually represent the Siemens employees over broader trade unions that span multiple companies across multiple countries. But since we're talking strictly ratification, I have one member that I would vote against.
Okay,
just
let's
one.
do it. Yeah.
Kasper Rorsted.
A no confidence vote for Kasper Rorsted. Why is that?
That would be my recommendation. Here's why. He has 7% of the influence. He is directly connected to Snabe through other boards. He bats 355 overall. He's the worst on the board for his 10 years overseeing huge controversies. 0.081 is his batting average. He just sits on controversial boards, one of which was he was the CEO of Adidas when they brought Kanye West in. They kept West doing his crazy stuff, despite reports that Kanye would spend meetings drawing swastikas and saying sexist things. They didn't fire him until he did it on Twitter, and there was a lot of blowback for things that he was saying. But he's one of the worst performers as it relates to actual share. He's a shareholder rep. He's one of the worst performers, and he has a history of anti-Semitic actions at a company in Germany. He might not be anti-Semitic, but he definitely tolerated some of it until Kanye did it openly. I don't know how much more you need if you're a shareholder, elected supervisory board member, if you haven't delivered to shareholders on actual performance, and there's controversial things that are kind of lingering, I think that might be the only one worth a no confidence vote for ratification.
No confidence vote on Casper Rorsted. And remember, shareholders are not actually able to vote on the election of the directors this year, only to ratify their performance last year. So moving on to pay votes, is this something that you have a recommendation on?
I have a couple of thoughts.
Okay, go ahead.
On the pay, and it's really about the structure of the pay. First of all, the structure of the pay is highly organized. I'm not used to this looking at a lot of U.S. pay.
And I was going to say, a lot of your analysis, or I could also weigh in on my analysis, would be from an American perspective, which is to say, holy crap, there are other jurisdictions that sensibly create plans to pay their executives. Although, it still might be a little bit much, but compared to America, it's pretty sensible.
I mean, I did need like an abacus and to take an advanced degree to still understand everything going on.
Yeah.
But I spent a lot of time, and it turns out a lot of this tends to be measurable, and like I could understand it after I got into it. You could see where all the money came from, and it's very fixed, right? Total pay for the CEO was 7.6 million last year, euros, which compare that to a U.S. executive at a company this size.
Right.
I mean, it's not even comparable. It's not even close. You'd be talking 30, 40, 50, if not $1 billion for executives now.
Yeah, this is a large company. This is a market cap of $140 billion.
Yes, it's a gigantic company. There was only one thing that I thought was great and one thing that I thought was fishy. The one thing I thought was great was the TSR metric that they use. You can get a 0% pay if you underperform your peers by 20% or more.
Which makes sense.
That not only does that make sense, but there's a straight line up to, you equal your peers, you get 100%. So it goes from 100% of your target pay down to 0 between 0 and negative 20% of your peers. It's very, very, it's not like in the US where it's like you won't get 95% if you are, below the 15th percentile, right? Like it's not like that. Like you can get none for sucking at your job, which I loved. I loved that. I thought that was great.
Right.
The thing I thought was fishy was actually the ESG component here.
Okay.
Turns out ESG on average equals about 7% of total pay for Siemens CEO.
Right. It represents 20% of annual bonus.
It's the long-term annual bonus. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Then there's short-term and long-term bonuses. That's a low number. It's not as low as the 1% we see in the US where people are freaking out about it, but it's still pretty low, but it's high enough to pay attention. But the three metrics that they've chosen for ESG include carbon, net promoter score, which is how much your customers like you, and digital learning hours per employee. Now, digital learning hours, we sat through plenty of pointless digital learning in our time at corporations. That is not only totally fudgeable, but totally ridiculous. It doesn't accomplish really anything, which means you could arguably, if you're just falling short, throw out a learning module to your employees, get those hours up, and bang, you hit your numbers for your ESG, which is 7% of your overall pay. Come up with a better metric than digital learning hours. Come on, we can do better. But there's nothing much else otherwise to see here. It's really hard to argue against the way they structure these pay packages.
I will say this to wrap up, that compared to U.S. companies, they do kind of drown you in a world of documents. Not only in the U.S. here, we are very lucky to have the SEC. It's a very organized system. We have one proxy statement that is filed within a certain time every year. Everything is filed through the SEC. In most European companies, including Germany, there is a absolute sea of PDFs, and there is no rhyme or reason to where they exist, where they don't exist, where the information is. Some of it is redundant, some of it is not. It's very difficult from an analyst perspective, and I'm guessing even more so for an investor's perspective to begin to analyze this. It's extremely time consuming.
Well, in this country, in the U.S., it does seem like they value the share pricing and money over people, and in Europe, it seems like they value process and bureaucracy over people. But in neither, the one unifying factor is if you want to know something about the people who are running these companies, it's really hard to get to that information, and it's really hard to come to conclusions about it until you dig deep.
Is that anything else on Siemens before we wrap up?
That's it. That's all. That's plenty.
If listeners have other requests for other jurisdictions or companies, please reach out to us. That's it. That's the Proxy Countdown for the week of January 29th, 2024. Join us next week when we jump back into the alternative democracy pool, forever on the lookout for shareholder sharks, floating band-aids, and wayward directors.